In Philippine literature, there are many stories that have shaped the way Filipinos read and view their surroundings. A good example is Jose Rizal's books Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. These novels are a long and sustained critical story about the Spanish rule. Another good example is through short stories such as the ones in this lesson. These selected short stories have had an extensive influence on Philippine literature and society. So, don't be surprised if they have also influenced television and popular culture. Meanwhile, Philippine theater began just like any other genre of literature with pre-colonial indigenous drama. These constitute rituals, verbal joust or games, and songs and dances praising their respective gods. Nowadays, Philippine theater has changed and incorporated many modern elements to keep it relevant to its growing audience. It still attacks contemporary issues and portrays the real lives of Filipinos here and abroad, but it also went back to some of its roots such as music and dance. Let's discuss first fiction. These are accounts of written stories about people and events that are not real. A fiction story is a story that is entirely made up and is not true. At times, fiction may resemble reality, but it is purely circumstantial. What are the common elements in fiction? Number one is setting. It is the environment in which the story takes place. It refers to both the time that a story is set and the place where the action occurs. In addition, the context or historical background in which the story is set provides us with additional plot information. The setting can establish the atmosphere of a work. And here is a sample setting from the work of Edgar Allan Poe entitled The Fall of the House of Usher. Number two common elements of fiction is character. It refers to the individuals that are depicted in each story. There are two general types of character, the protagonist and the antagonist. Protagonist is a leading character in a story, while antagonist is a character who opposes the protagonist, often working in contrast to the protagonist, such as a villain. Characters are identified by a dominant trait, motivation, or characteristic such as loyalty, ambition, greed, and arrogance. Characters are often classified as static, or those change very little throughout a story, or dynamic, those who change or transform throughout a story and are described at great length. Example static character is Scar from Lion King, and dynamic character Simba from Lion King also. Characterization refers to how the characters are developed and depicted. Authors use a variety of methods to reveal their characters and to communicate information about them. Here are the methods of characterization. Number one, physical description. It speaks of what he or she looks like in a narrator's input. Next is dialogue. What a character says gives insight to his or her personality. Third, actions. It is what the character does that provides an impression for the reader. Thoughts. It is what a character thinks, offers a glimpse into what he or she is like. And the last, inference. It is what others say about the character, lets us gain insight about the character. Number three common elements in fiction is conflict. It is the central source of tension in the story. It usually involves a struggle between opposing characters, emotions, and a lot more. There are two types of conflict. Number one is external, and number two is internal. Under external conflict are the following: man versus man, man versus nature, man versus society, man versus faith, and man versus technology. While internal conflict has only one, which is man versus himself. Number 4 common elements in fiction is plot. Plot is a story's plan of action, the series of events that make up the story. It allows the reader to select the pertinent plot elements and trace how they build to the end of the story. So here is the chart plot wherein it starts with exposition, followed by the rising action, the climax, falling action, and resolution. So let's discuss all of them. Let's start with the introduction, or what we call the exposition. In the introduction part, we introduce the setting, characters, and the conflict. It serves to entice the reader to keep reading. Number 2 is the rising action. It is where we can find the suspense, the conflicts, problems, or obstacles all occur to create a series of crises. The next is the climax. It is the outcome of a decision that had to be made. This major decision influences the rest of the story. You can also find in the climax part the turning point of the story where conflicts are resolved and the highest point of interest in the story when a character solves his or her struggles. The next is the falling action wherein the loose ends of the plot are tied up and the conflict or conflicts and the climax are taken care of. The last part is the conclusion or the resolution part. It is also known as the denouement. This refers to the final details of the story. Conflicts are over and the final statements are made. Not all stories have a formal conclusion. Let's discuss the elements of a plot of a story entitled Hunger Games. The exposition in the Hunger Games story by Suzanne Collins is when we meet Katniss Everdeen. The rising action is introduced when we see that Katniss is tasked with representing her district in the games. As such, she will face a series of difficult battles. These battles reach their climax when Katniss is tied in a competition with one of the other representatives from another district. They decided to kill themselves rather than kill each other. The falling action and the resolution take place when we see that the officials don't want that to happen to the participants and instead declare them both victorious. And the fifth common elements in fiction is what we call the point of view. The point of view is the one telling the story. There are different types of point of view, namely the first person, second person, and the third person, which have the following: third person objective, third person limited, and third person omniscient. The first person is a character within the story, recounts his or her own experiences or impression. It lets the reader know only what that character knows and uses the pronouns I and we. While in the second person point of view, the story is told from the perspective of you. Uncommon form of writing sometimes used in poetry and interactive fictions. It uses the pronoun you. And in the third person objective, the narrator remains a detached observer telling only the story's action and dialogue. It lets the reader know only what is seen and heard, not what characters think or feel. It uses the pronouns he, she, it, and they. In the third person limited, the narrator tells the story from the viewpoint of one character in the story. It lets the reader know what one character thinks, sees, knows, hears, and feels. It uses the pronouns he, she, it, and they. In the third person omniscient, the narrator has unlimited knowledge and can describe every character's thoughts and interpret their behaviors. Lets the reader know unlimited information about the characters, and it uses the pronouns he, she, it, and they. And the last common elements in fiction is what we call the theme. The theme is the main message or idea the author is trying to communicate in the story about life or human nature. It is generally an underlying idea of value about the very topic that the author wrote about.